August 7th, 1944, 2:15 in the afternoon, outside the town of Mortain, France. Oberfeldwebel Hans Becker stood in the commander's cupola of his Panther tank and counted the burning Shermans. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All destroyed within the last 2 hours. Black smoke rose from their turrets. Ammunition cooked off inside the hulls, sending fountains of sparks into the summer sky. His crew had performed well. The Panther's 75mm KWK 42L70 gun had torn through Sherman armor at ranges exceeding 1,500 meters. The Americans hadn't stood a chance. Their 75mm guns couldn't penetrate the Panther's frontal armor, even at point-blank range. The engagement had been a slaughter. Becker felt satisfaction, pride. His 4 years of combat experience showed. His crew functioned like a machine. Gunner Miller could hit a moving target at 2,000 meters. Loader Schmidt could maintain a rate of fire that few other crews matched. Driver Koch could maneuver the 45-ton Panther across terrain that would bog down lesser tanks. 5 Shermans destroyed in 2 hours. A good day. Then Becker looked east toward the American lines, and his satisfaction evaporated. More Shermans were approaching. Not 5, not 10, dozens, maybe more than 100, spread across the Bocage countryside in a line that extended beyond his field of vision. And behind them, according to reconnaissance reports, were hundreds more, maybe thousands. Becker's radio crackled. His company commander's voice, urgent. All units, fall back to secondary positions. Enemy armor approaching in overwhelming numbers. We cannot hold here. 5 Shermans destroyed, but the Americans kept coming because they had 5,000 more where those came from. Actually, 45,000 more. The United States had produced approximately 50,000 Sherman tanks between 1942 and 1945. 11 factories working around the clock. Mass production on a scale Germany couldn't match, couldn't even comprehend. Germany had built 6,000 Panthers, 1,347 Tigers, 485 Tiger IIs, impressive tanks, superior tanks, but not enough tanks. The mathematics were brutal. The Americans could lose 5 Shermans for every Panther and still have Shermans left over when Germany ran out of Panthers, could accept casualty ratios that would bankrupt any European military and still advance. Becker was about to learn what industrial warfare meant. What happened when a nation with the productive capacity of the United States fought a nation with the productive capacity of Germany. The lesson would be written in burning tanks, and most of them would be German. Hans Becker was born April 12, 1920, in Mannheim, Germany. Working-class family. His father operated a lathe at a machine shop. His mother took in laundry. They lived in a 2-room apartment near the industrial district. The smell of coal smoke and machine oil permeated everything. Mannheim in 1920 was a broken city. Germany had lost the Great War 2 years earlier. The Treaty of Versailles had imposed crushing reparations. Unemployment was high. Food was scarce. The economy was collapsing into hyperinflation. Young Hans grew up watching his father struggle, watch bread prices increase from hundreds of marks to millions to billions. Watch the family's savings become worthless. Watch Germany's humiliation become daily reality. In 1933, when Hans was 13, Adolf Hitler became Chancellor. The Nazis promised to restore Germany's honor, to rebuild German industry, to make Germany powerful again. Hans's father, like many working-class Germans, believed them. joined the party, hung a swastika flag from the apartment window. Hans joined the Hitler Youth, learned discipline, physical fitness, national pride. The Hitler Youth taught him to shoot, to march, to follow orders, to believe that Germany's destiny was greatness. He wasn't political, didn't care about ideology, but he absorbed the message. Germany had been cheated after the Great War. Germany deserved better. Germany would rise again. In 1938, at age 18, Hans was conscripted into the Wehrmacht. He reported to a training depot in Stuttgart, was assigned to the Panzer Arm, the armored forces, Germany's new way of war. Tank training was intensive. 6 months of instruction, how to operate a Panzer III, how to maintain the engine, how to fight as part of an armored formation. The instructors were veterans of the Spanish Civil War. They knew what combat looked like, made sure their trainees knew too. Hans excelled. He was mechanically inclined, could diagnose engine problems by sound, could strip and reassemble the tank's main gun blindfolded. His instructors noted his aptitude, marked him as potential NCO material. He graduated training in March 1939, was assigned to the 5th Panzer Regiment. The unit was stationed near the Polish border. Nobody said why, but everyone knew. War was coming. September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland. Hans's regiment crossed the border at dawn. The campaign was unlike anything military history had seen before. The panzers moved fast, bypassed Polish strongpoints, drove deep into Polish territory before Polish commanders could react. The Luftwaffe controlled the skies. Polish cavalry charged German tanks and were slaughtered. Hans's Panzer III participated in the encirclement of Warsaw. The Polish capital fell after 3 weeks of bombardment. The campaign ended in 36 days. Total German victory. Hans had seen combat, had fired his tank's gun at Polish positions, had watched Polish soldiers die, had seen what mechanized warfare could accomplish, the speed, the shock, the coordination between armor, infantry, and air power. He'd also seen German tanks destroyed, mechanical breakdowns, mines, occasionally Polish anti-tank guns that got lucky, but overall, German losses were light. The campaign proved the concept. Blitzkrieg worked. May 1940, the campaign in the West. Hans's regiment was part of Army Group A. They attacked through the Ardennes forest. French commanders had declared the Ardennes impossible to armor. They were wrong. German panzers crossed the Meuse River at Sedan, broke through French defensive lines, drove toward the English Channel. The French army collapsed. British forces evacuated from Dunkirk. France signed an armistice after 6 weeks, another complete German victory. Hans had been promoted to Gefreiter, then to Unteroffizier. His skills were recognized, his calm under fire, his ability to keep his crew functioning when everything was chaos. But he'd also seen something that worried him. German tanks weren't clearly superior to French tanks. The French Char B-1 had better armor than any German tank. The Somua S-35 was better designed than the Panzer III. Yet Germany had won anyway. Why? Organization, coordination, speed. The French had better individual tanks but couldn't use them effectively. German doctrine emphasized combined arms operations, radio communication between tanks, air support coordinated with ground attacks. The French fought in 1940 using tactics from 1918. Hans learned tactics and training mattered more than equipment, a lesson he'd remember later. when the equipment disparity ran in the opposite direction. June 22, 1941. Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. Hans's regiment was now equipped with the new Panzer IV AUSF. Better gun, better armor. They crossed the Soviet border as part of Army Group Center. Objective, Moscow. The first weeks were another blitzkrieg triumph. Massive encirclements, hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers captured, Soviet tanks destroyed in huge numbers. The Red Army seemed to be disintegrating. Then Hans encountered the T-34. It happened near Smolensk in July 1941. His company was advancing through a forest when 3 T-34s appeared. The German tanks opened fire. Shells bounced off the T-34's sloped armor. The T-34s returned fire. Their 76mm guns penetrated German armor easily. 3 Panzer IVs were destroyed before the T-34s withdrew. Hans was shaken. The T-34 was better than any German tank. Faster, better armored, more powerful gun. If the Soviets had thousands of these, the campaign would be much harder than expected. They did have thousands. Production numbers Hans wouldn't learn until after the war. The Soviet Union built over 35,000 T-34s between 1940 and 1945. Factory production continued even as German forces approached Moscow. Soviet factories were relocated beyond the Urals. Production never stopped. The advance toward Moscow slowed. Soviet resistance stiffened. The weather deteriorated. Mud in autumn, snow in winter. Temperatures dropped to -40 Celsius. German equipment failed. Tanks wouldn't start. Fuel froze. Soldiers froze. December 1941. The offensive stalled 20 miles from Moscow. Then Soviet counterattacks began. Fresh Siberian divisions, new T-34s. The Wehrmacht was forced to retreat. Hans survived the winter of 1941 to 42. Barely. Frostbite damaged 3 of his toes. The cold killed more men than Soviet. Guns. His regiment lost half its strength to weather, combat, and mechanical failures. By spring 1942, Hans had been promoted to Feldwebel, was commanding his own Panzer IV, had accumulated 2 years of combat experience, had seen Germany's armored forces nearly destroyed in Russia, had learned that superior tactics couldn't always overcome material disadvantages. The tide was turning. German production couldn't replace losses. The Soviet Union was producing more tanks than Germany could destroy. The mathematics of attrition were working against Germany. But Hans didn't understand the full scope of the problem yet. Didn't understand that the Wehrmacht was about to face not just Soviet production, but American production. Production on a scale that would make Soviet output look modest. November 1942. Hans's regiment was withdrawn from the Eastern Front, sent to France for rest and refitting. The men needed recovery. Equipment needed replacement. The 2 years in Russia had ground the unit down to barely functional. While in France, Hans's company was re-equipped. The Panzer IVs were replaced with new Panther tanks. The Panther was Germany's response to the T-34, designed specifically to match the Soviet tanks' capabilities. The Panther was impressive, 45 tons, sloped frontal armor up to 80 millimeters thick. The 75mm KWK 42L70 gun could penetrate 140 millimeters of armor at 1,000 meters. Maximum speed, 46 kilometers per hour. A formidable machine. Hans loved it. After 2 years fighting in outmatched Panzer IVs, the Panther felt like moving up several weight classes. The gun could destroy any Soviet tank from ranges exceeding 2,000 meters. The armor could resist most Soviet anti-tank guns. The mobility was excellent despite the weight. Training on the Panther took months. The tank was complex, more complex than earlier German designs. The Maybach H L230P 30 engine produced 700 horsepower, but required careful maintenance. The transmission was sophisticated, but prone to failure if mishandled. The interleaved road wheel suspension gave excellent ride quality, but was difficult to maintain in muddy conditions. Hans and his crew practiced for months. Gun drills, movement drills, maintenance procedures. By May 1943, they were proficient, ready to return to combat. July 1943, Operation Citadel, the Battle of Kursk. Hans's regiment was part of the Southern Pincer. Objective: break through Soviet defenses around Kursk, encircle and destroy Soviet forces in the salient, the largest armored offensive in history. The Wehrmacht committed over 2,900 tanks and assault guns. The Soviets had approximately 5,000 tanks defending, including hundreds of T-34s, and new heavy tanks, KV-1s, and the massive ISU-152 self-propelled guns. July 5th, 1943. The offensive began. Hans's Panther performed well initially. The gun destroyed T-34s at long range. The armor resisted return fire. But mechanical problems emerged immediately. Panthers broke down. Transmissions failed. Engines overheated. Final drives broke. Of the 200 Panthers committed to Kursk, fewer than 50 remained operational after the first week. Hans's tank survived, but he watched other Panthers disabled by mechanical failures, watched crews abandon perfectly good-looking tanks because the transmission had seized or the engine had caught fire. The offensive failed. Soviet defenses were too deep. Soviet reserves too numerous. After 2 weeks, the attack was called off. German losses were staggering. Over 500 tanks destroyed or disabled. Kursk was the last German offensive on the Eastern Front. From July 1943 onward, the Wehrmacht was on the defensive, retreating slowly, trading space for time, hoping to inflict enough casualties to force the Soviets to negotiate. But the Soviets weren't negotiating. They were advancing, and behind them came American and British forces in Italy, and soon in France. Hans didn't know it yet, but the war was already lost. The only question was how long it would take. June 6th, 1944. D-Day. Allied forces landed in Normandy. Hans's regiment was stationed near Paris. They were rushed to the invasion front. Arrived on June 8th, were immediately thrown into combat against British and Canadian forces near Caen. The fighting was brutal, different from Russia. The Bocage countryside was a defender's paradise, narrow roads bordered by thick hedgerows, small fields, limited visibility. Tanks couldn't maneuver freely. Every hedgerow concealed potential ambushes. Allied air power was overwhelming. The Luftwaffe was nowhere. Allied fighter bombers controlled the skies, attacked German columns constantly. Hans learned to move only at night, to hide the Panther under trees during daylight, to fear the sound of aircraft engines. But the ground combat was manageable initially. Allied tanks were vulnerable. British Cromwells and Churchills couldn't penetrate the Panther's frontal armor. The early American Sherman models were even worse. The Panther's gun could destroy them at 2,000 meters. They had to, close to 500 meters, to have any chance of penetrating Panther armor. Hans's crew became skilled at this asymmetric warfare. Position the Panther hull down. Wait for Allied tanks to advance. Destroy them at long range. Fall back to next position before Allied artillery could respond. Through June and July 1944, Hans's crew destroyed dozens of Allied tanks, mostly Shermans, some British Cromwells. The engagements were one-sided when the Panther could choose the range and position. But Hans noticed something disturbing. Every Sherman they destroyed was replaced, sometimes within hours. The Allies seemed to have infinite reserves. Destroyed a platoon of 4 Shermans in the morning, and 8 more would appear in the afternoon. German losses, by contrast, were barely replaced. When a Panther was destroyed, it stayed destroyed. Replacement tanks arrived slowly, often not at all. The regiment's strength declined from 80 Panthers in June to 45 by the end of July, then to 30 by mid-August. Hans Boel didn't understand why. Germany still had factories, still had workers, still controlled most of Europe. Why couldn't they build enough tanks? The answer was brutal and mathematical. American production versus German production. Let's examine the numbers. Sherman production. Approximately 50,000 tanks produced between 1942 and 1945. 11 factories across the United States. Peak production, 2,000 Shermans per month in 1943. The factories worked 3 shifts, 24 hours per day, 7 days a week. The factories weren't even primarily tank manufacturers. Chrysler built cars before the war. Fisher Body built car bodies. Ford built automobiles. American Locomotive built trains. They converted to tank production in months. Applied mass production techniques perfected in the automobile industry. The results were staggering. Fisher Body's Grand Blanc tank arsenal produced its first Sherman in April 1942. By June 1943, the factory was producing 15 Shermans per day, 450 per month. The Chrysler Detroit tank arsenal produced even more. At peak efficiency, 25 Shermans per day. Components were standardized, interchangeable between factories. A Sherman built at Chrysler could use a transmission built for Fisher Body. A turret from Ford could fit on a hull from Lima Locomotive. This interchangeability meant parts could be stockpiled, repairs expedited, logistics simplified. Compare this to German Panther production. Total Panthers built, approximately 6,000 between 1943 and 1945. 4 factories: MAN, Daimler-Benz, MNH, and Henschel. Peak production, 380 Panthers in July 1944. Why so few? The reasons were multiple and systemic. First, German manufacturing philosophy. German tanks were engineered, designed by craftsmen. Each component was precisely manufactured to tight tolerances. Quality was emphasized over quantity. This produced excellent tanks, but slow production. The Panther required approximately 55,000 man-hours to build. A Sherman required 10,000. The Panther was better, but was it 5 times better? In combat, yes. In war, probably not. Second, strategic bombing. Allied bombers targeted German industry relentlessly. The Maybach engine plant that produced engines for both Panthers and Tigers was bombed April 27th to 28th, 1944. Production halted for 5 months. The Daimler-Benz plant was bombed August 6th, 1944. MAN was bombed September 10th, October 3rd, October 19th, 1944, then again January 3rd and February 20th to 21st, 1945. American factories were never bombed, operated without interruption, could plan production years in advance. German factories operated under constant threat of destruction. Third, resources. Germany lacked raw materials, depended on captured resources from occupied territories, oil from Romania, iron ore from Sweden, chromium from Turkey. These supply lines were vulnerable, constantly disrupted. The United States had everything: oil from Texas, iron from Minnesota, steel from Pittsburgh, rubber from synthetic production, an entire continent's resources available for war production. Fourth, labor. German factories relied increasingly on slave labor, forced laborers from occupied countries, concentration camp prisoners. These workers had no incentive to produce quality goods, often sabotaged production deliberately. Quality control was a constant problem. American factories employed free workers, paid wages, offered benefits. Workers had incentive to produce. Quality was high. Sabotage was non-existent. The combined effect was overwhelming. By mid-1944, the United States was outproducing Germany by factors of 5 to 10 in most categories: tanks, aircraft, trucks, ships, ammunition. Germany built 6,000 Panthers. America built 50,000 Shermans. Germany built 1,347 Tiger Is and 485 Tiger IIs. Total, 1,832 heavy tanks. The Soviet Union built 35,000 T-34s. The mathematics were impossible. Germany was fighting a war of attrition it couldn't win. Every tank destroyed was increasingly difficult to replace. Every experienced crew killed was irreplaceable. The Allies could afford losses, could trade tanks for time and position, could accept casualty ratios that would horrify European military planners. Hans was about to experience this firsthand. August 7th, 1944. The battle outside Mortaines. Hans's company was ordered to counterattack American forces threatening to encircle German positions. The company had 12 Panthers operational. Intelligence reported approximately 40 American tanks in the area, mostly Shermans. The attack began at dawn. Hans's Panther moved through the bocage with practiced caution. The 75mm gun was loaded with armor-piercing ammunition. The crew was alert, ready. They encountered the first Shermans at 8:30 a.m., 4 tanks moving up a narrow road. Hans's gunner, Miller, acquired the lead tank. Range, 1,800 meters. Miller fired. The armor-piercing shell hit the Sherman's frontal armor, penetrated. The Sherman exploded. Ammunition detonation. The turret flew 10 meters into the air. The other 3 Shermans scattered. One turned to flee. Miller hit it in the rear, penetrated the engine compartment. Fire. The crew bailed out. The other 2 Shermans tried to find cover behind a hedgerow. Miller hit one through the hedgerow. Destroyed. The 4th Sherman fired back. Its 75mm shell hit the Panther's frontal armor. Bounced off. No penetration. No damage. Miller fired again. 4th Sherman destroyed. 4 Shermans destroyed in maybe 2 minutes. Textbook gunnery. Hans's company continued advancing. Destroyed 3 more Shermans by 10 a.m. The pattern was consistent. Spot the Sherman at long range. Fire first. Destroy before the Sherman could get close enough for its gun to be effective. The Panther's advantages were overwhelming at these ranges. The 75mm KWK, 42 L-70 gun could penetrate 138 millimeters of armor at 1,000 meters. The Sherman's frontal armor was only 51 millimeters. At any range beyond 500 meters, a Panther crew with decent training couldn't miss. The Sherman's 75 millimeter M3 gun, by contrast, could penetrate only 60 millimeters of armor at 500 meters. The Panther's frontal armor was 80 millimeters and sloped at 55 degrees from vertical. This created an effective thickness of over 140 millimeters. The Sherman's gun literally couldn't penetrate a Panther from the front at any range. This asymmetry defined most tank versus tank combat in France. German crews would position their Panthers hull down, wait for Shermans to advance, destroy them systematically from ranges where the Shermans couldn't fight back. American tank crews learned to fear the Panther, learned that frontal attacks were suicide, developed tactics to compensate, use numerical superiority, flank positions, coordinate with infantry, call in artillery, request air support. But sometimes flanking wasn't possible. Sometimes Shermans had to attack frontally, and when that happened, casualties were brutal. Hans witnessed this at 11:30 a.m. A company of Shermans, approximately 14 tanks, advanced across open ground toward the German position. The Panthers were concealed in a tree line. The Shermans were exposed. The engagement lasted 6 minutes. All 14 Shermans were destroyed or disabled. The Germans lost 0 tanks. Several Panthers were hit. The 75 millimeter rounds bounced off or inflicted only minor damage. No penetrations, no German casualties. 14 American tank crews, 70 men, many killed, most wounded, for no gain. No territory captured. No German losses. Hans felt sick watching it. This wasn't combat. This was slaughter. The Americans were being fed into a meat grinder by commanders who apparently didn't care about casualties. But then, something happened that changed Hans's understanding. At noon, another company of Shermans appeared, moving on a different approach route, coordinating with infantry, with artillery support. These Shermans didn't charge blindly. They advanced in bounds, used smoke. The infantry suppressed German positions with rifle and machine gun fire. Artillery plastered the German positions. The Panthers destroyed several Shermans. But this time, some Shermans got close. Within 500 meters, their guns could penetrate Panther side armor at that range. One Panther was hit, penetrated, burned. The crew escaped. The Americans kept coming. More artillery, more smoke, more infantry. The German position became untenable. Hans's company commander ordered withdrawal to secondary positions. As Hans's Panther backed out of position, he saw more Shermans arriving, counted at least 30 additional tanks, and infantry, and tank destroyers, and artillery. The Americans had lost maybe 20 tanks that morning, and were attacking with 40 more by afternoon. Where were all these tanks coming from? Hans didn't know about the massive buildup in England, didn't know that over 5,000 American and British tanks had been assembled for the Normandy invasion, didn't know that replacement tanks were arriving from the United States daily, didn't know that even the heavy losses in Bocage combat were sustainable for the Allies. What he did know was what he could see. The Americans had unlimited tanks. By 2 p.m., Hans's company had destroyed 17 American tanks total. A remarkable achievement. Any German tank ace would be proud of that score in a single day. But the American offensive didn't stop, didn't slow, didn't even pause. The 17 destroyed tanks were replaced. The attack continued. Hans's company destroyed 5 more Shermans that afternoon, 22 total, then received orders to withdraw. They'd won every tactical engagement, destroyed 22 enemy tanks, lost 2 Panthers to combat damage, and 1 to mechanical failure. A kill ratio of 7-1. Excellent by any measure, and they were retreating, because tactical victories didn't matter when the enemy had unlimited reserves. That night, Hans's company pulled back to positions near Mortain. The town itself was already in American hands. The German counteroffensive had failed. The encirclement hadn't been prevented. The front was collapsing. Hans's company commander held a meeting, showed a map, explained the strategic situation. It was grim. "Gentlemen," the commander said, "we destroyed over 200 American tanks this week, our entire division. Every company reported excellent kill ratios, but the Americans keep advancing. Do you know why?" Nobody answered. Everyone knew why. Because they have thousands more tanks where those came from. We've captured documents, seen intelligence reports. The Americans have stockpiled over 5,000 tanks in France. 5,000. And more arriving every day. Ships from America deliver hundreds of tanks per week. He paused. Let that sink in. We've lost 40 Panthers this week. Replacements? Maybe 5 tanks. Maybe. The factories in Germany can't keep up with losses, can't even come close. We're destroying 5 American tanks for every Panther lost. It doesn't matter. They can afford those losses. We can't. Another pause. So we keep fighting. Keep destroying as many as possible. Make them pay for every meter. But understand, we're not stopping them. We're delaying them. There's a difference. Hans understood. They were fighting a losing war of attrition. Every battle they won tactically, every strategic position they lost anyway. The mathematics were impossible. Germany had perhaps 2,000 tanks on the Western Front in August 1944. The Allies had over 15,000. Even with superior German tanks and training, those numbers couldn't be overcome. Hans thought about the tactical engagement that morning. 4 Shermans destroyed in 2 minutes. He'd felt pride, satisfaction. His crew had performed perfectly, but 4 destroyed Shermans meant nothing, because 40 more were coming down the road, and behind them 400 more, and behind those 4,000 more. Germany couldn't win a war like this, couldn't match this level of production, couldn't replace losses at this rate, couldn't sustain combat operations when outproduced 10-1. The war was lost. Hans knew it that night, sitting in his Panther, eating cold rations, watching American artillery flash on the horizon. They'd keep fighting. German discipline demanded it. Pride demanded it. Hope that something might change demanded it. But realistically, the outcome was determined. Had been determined when the first Sherman rolled off the production line in 1942, when American industry committed to building 50,000 tanks, when the United States decided it would fight a war of production rather than a war of quality. Hans's Panther was better than any Sherman. His training was better than most American tank crews. His tactical skills exceeded his opponents. None of it mattered, because the Americans could lose 5 Shermans for every Panther and still have Shermans left when Germany ran out of Panthers. That was the reality of industrial warfare. That was what total war meant in the 20th century. And Hans was about to live through 9 more months of this reality before Germany finally surrendered. Then Hans saw what was coming. From his position on high ground, he could see the American rear areas, and what he saw shocked him. Hundreds of Shermans, lined up, moving forward, more Shermans than Hans had seen in his entire career. They kept coming, company after company, battalion after battalion. The Americans didn't stop, didn't slow, didn't seem to care how many tanks were destroyed. Hans's radio crackled with reports from other positions. Every German unit was reporting the same thing: overwhelming numbers, unsustainable losses. The Americans were pushing forward regardless of casualties. Hans's company destroyed 5 more Shermans that afternoon. But the American advance didn't slow. For every Sherman destroyed, 3 more appeared. By evening, Hans's company was ordered to retreat. They destroyed 22 American tanks, but couldn't hold their position against hundreds more. That night, Hans talked with his company commander, asked the question that had been bothering him. "Sir, where are they getting all these tanks?" The commander's answer was stark. "America. They have factories we can't bomb, resources we can't interdict, workers we can't starve. They're building thousands of tanks, tens of thousands. We can't match their production, can't even come close." Hans understood then. Germany was fighting a war of attrition against an opponent with effectively unlimited resources. Every tactical victory was strategically meaningless. The Americans could lose 5 tanks for every Panther and still have Shermans left over when Germany ran out of Panthers. The war was lost, had been lost before D-Day, probably had been lost when America entered the war in December 1941. Everything since had been delaying the inevitable. The American productive capacity was beyond anything European military planners could comprehend. Consider the scale. The United States entered World War II in December 1941. By mid-1942, American industry was already transitioning to war production. By 1943, production had reached levels that boggled the mind. But the transformation didn't happen instantly. It required total reorganization of the American economy, required converting civilian factories to military production, required training millions of workers, required developing logistics systems to move materials across a continent. The story of this transformation reveals how America won the war before a single Sherman tank fired a shot in combat. January 1942, Washington, D.C. The War Production Board was established. Chairman, Donald Nelson, former executive at Sears Roebuck. His job, convert American industry from peacetime production to war production immediately. The scale of the task was staggering. In 1941, American automobile factories had produced 3.8 million civilian cars. That production had to stop. The factories had to retool, start producing tanks, aircraft, engines, weapons. Ford Motor Company provides the clearest example. In 1941, Ford's River Rouge plant in Dearborn, Michigan, was the largest integrated factory in the world. Employed 100,000 workers, produced 1.2 million automobiles per year. In February 1942, Ford stopped building cars completely. The assembly lines went silent. Then they were torn apart, rebuilt, reconfigured. By July 1942, the same factory was producing B-24 Liberator bombers, not just assembling them, building them from raw materials. Iron ore came in one end. Finished bombers rolled out the other. Ford's new Willow Run plant was even more impressive. Built from scratch in 1942, 1 mile long, 67 acres of floor space. The building was so large it created its own weather, Clouds formed inside on humid days. Willow Run employed 42,000 workers, 3 shifts, 24 hours per day. At peak production, one B-24 bomber rolled off the assembly line every 63 minutes. The plant produced 8,685 bombers between 1942 and 1945. That was one factory. Making one type of aircraft, the automobile industry as a whole produced staggering amounts of war material. Tanks. The Detroit Arsenal tank plant, built by Chrysler in 1940 to 1941, produced 25,000 tanks, mostly M4 Shermans. At peak efficiency, the plant completed 25 tanks per day. That's one tank every 58 minutes, running 24 hours per day. Fisher Body's Grand Blanc tank arsenal produced 11,000 Shermans between April 1942 and January 1945. Peak production, 15 tanks per day. Ford's tank production facility produced 2,800 M4A3 Shermans with 76mm guns. The 4G AAV-8 engine that powered these tanks was specifically designed for Sherman production. Simple, powerful, reliable. American Locomotive Company, Pacific Car and Foundry, Baldwin Locomotive Works, Lima Locomotive Works, Pressed Steel Car Company, companies that had built trains before the war, all converted to tank production. Each produced thousands of tanks. The total, 49,324 Sherman tanks produced between 1942 and 1946. But that's just Shermans. Add in all other American tank types, M3 Lees, M5 Stewarts, M18 Hellcats, M10 tank destroyers, M26 Pershings. The total American tank production exceeded 75,000 vehicles. Aircraft production was even more impressive. Boeing produced 12,731 B-17 Flying Fortress heavy bombers. Each B-17 required 400,000 man-hours to build. Boeing employed 33,000 workers in Seattle, operated 3 shifts, produced 2 B-17s per day at peak. Consolidated Aircraft produced 18,482 B-24 Liberator bombers. Willow Run produced 8,685 of those. The rest came from Consolidated's plants in San Diego, Fort Worth, and Tulsa. North American Aviation produced 15,000 P-51 Mustang fighters, designed in 1940. First prototype flew in October 1940. In production by 1942. By 1944, North American was producing 500 P-51s per month. Republic Aviation produced 15,683 P-47 Thunderbolt fighters, heavy, rugged, powered by the massive 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R2800 radial engine. The P-47 could absorb tremendous battle damage and keep flying. Douglas produced 10,000 C-47 Skytrain transport aircraft, the military version of the DC-3 commercial airliner, essential for airborne operations, for supply transport, for wounded evacuation. Grumman produced 12,275 F-6F Hellcat carrier fighters, designed specifically to defeat the Japanese Zero, entered service in 1943, dominated Pacific air combat. Hellcat pilots achieved a kill ratio of 19-1 against Japanese aircraft. The total American aircraft production, 1941 to 1945, over 300,000 military aircraft, not counting trainers. not counting civilian aircraft, impressed into military service. Compare this to Axis production. Germany produced approximately 120,000 military aircraft 1939 to 1945, including trainers. Japan produced approximately 76,000 military aircraft 1939 to 1945. Italy produced approximately 11,000 military aircraft 1940 to 1943 until Italy's surrender. Combined Axis production about 207,000 aircraft. Allied production over 750,000 aircraft, including 300,000 American, 160,000 Soviet, 130,000 British, plus Commonwealth and other Allied production. The disparity was crushing. By 1944, the Allies had complete air superiority over every battlefield. German and Japanese aircraft were rarely seen. When they appeared, they were outnumbered and quickly destroyed. But aircraft and tanks were only part of the story. Consider ships. The United States Maritime Commission organized merchant ship production, standardized designs, applied mass production techniques. The result? Liberty ships. The Liberty ship was a cargo vessel, 441 feet long, 7,200 gross tonnage, could carry 9,140 tons of cargo, speed 11 knots, range 17,000 miles, crew 44. Not impressive individually, but produced in staggering numbers. Total Liberty ships built 2,710. They were built using prefabrication. Sections were built in different factories, transported to shipyards, welded together. The average construction time, 42 days from keel laying to launch. The record, Robert E. Peary. Built in Richmond, California, November 1942. Keel laid November 8th, launched November 12th. 4 days, 15 hours, 29 minutes from start to launch. How? Assembly line techniques applied to shipbuilding, prefabricated sections, standardized components, around-the-clock work. At Kaiser Shipyards in Richmond, California, 7 shipways operated simultaneously, could build 7 Liberty ships concurrently. The Liberty ships weren't pretty. They were slow. They were basic. But they worked, and there were thousands of them. Germany's U-boats sank 1,554 Allied merchant ships in 1942. But the Allies built more than that. Net increase in Allied merchant shipping, despite heavy losses. Beyond Liberty ships, the United States built 175 major combat vessels, battleships, carriers, cruisers, destroyers, 349 destroyer escorts, 420 destroyer escort vessels, 203 submarines, 88,000 landing craft of all types. The landing craft deserves special mention. The D-Day invasion required 5,000 ships and landing craft. Most were American-built, specially designed, produced in huge numbers. LEST, landing ship tank, could carry 20 Sherman tanks or 40 trucks. 1,051 built. LCI, landing craft infantry, could carry 200 troops. 923 built. LCT, landing craft tank, could carry 5 Sherman tanks, thousands built. These weren't sophisticated vessels. They were simple, functional, mass-produced, and they made amphibious operations possible on a scale never seen before. Consider logistics vehicles, the famous Deuce and a Half, GMCCCK, W 2.5-ton cargo truck, the workhorse of Allied logistics, could carry 2.5 tons cross-country. Reliable, simple, produced in huge numbers. Total production, 562,750 trucks, just of that one model. Include all military trucks. 2.5 million produced 1941 to 1945. These trucks were essential. Modern armies require massive logistics: food, ammunition, fuel, medical supplies, replacement parts. All must be transported to the front. The Red Ball Express after D-Day demonstrated this. 6,000 trucks operated continuously, transported 12,500 tons of supplies daily from Normandy ports to frontline forces advancing through France. Operated August to November 1944. Without these trucks, Patton's Third Army would have stopped for lack of fuel. The trucks were mostly driven by African American soldiers, segregated units, given essential but unglamorous roles. They performed brilliantly, drove day and night, maintained impossible schedules, kept the advance moving. But beyond specific numbers, consider the transformation of American society. In 1940, the United States was producing 3.8 million automobiles annually. In 1941, production increased to 4.5 million. Then, in 1942, civilian automobile production stopped completely. 0 cars produced 1943 to 1944. The factories that had built cars were building tanks, aircraft, engines, weapons. The workers who had assembled cars were assembling bombers. The steel that had gone into automobiles went into ships. Entire industries transformed overnight. The transformation was managed by the War Production Board, directed by dollar-a-year men, business executives who worked for the government for $1 per year, donating their expertise. Resources were allocated centrally. Priorities were established. If aluminum was needed for aircraft production, civilian uses were eliminated. If steel was needed for ships, civilian construction stopped. If rubber was needed for tires, civilian consumption was rationed. The American public accepted these restrictions. Rationing was universal: gasoline, meat, sugar, coffee, butter, shoes. Americans understood their soldiers needed supplies, accepted shortages willingly. Women entered the workforce in unprecedented numbers. Rosie the Riveter became the symbol. Before 1941, most married women didn't work outside the home. By 1944, over 6 million women were working in war production factories. They built aircraft, built ships, built tanks, welded, riveted, assembled components. The propaganda image was simplified, but the reality was impressive. Women proved they could handle industrial work as well as men. African Americans moved from the South to industrial centers, found work in factories, faced discrimination, but earned wages, gained skills. The Great Migration accelerated. The result was economic mobilization on a scale never seen before or since. Unemployment dropped from 14.6% in 1940 to 1.2% in 1944. GDP increased from $101 billion in 1940 to $223 billion in 1945. Government spending increased from $9.5 billion in 1940 to $98 billion. In 1945, federal debt increased from $43 billion in 1940 to $259 billion in 1946. These numbers represented total mobilization. The American economy was completely reorganized for war production, and the output was staggering. By 1944, the United States was producing 40% of the world's armaments, more war material than Germany, Japan, and Italy combined, as much steel as all Axis powers combined, twice as much oil as all other countries in the world combined. The Axis powers never had a chance. Not against this level of production, not against an economy that could sustain these output levels for years. And the American production machine was just reaching peak efficiency when Germany surrendered. Production could have continued at these levels for years more if necessary. The Axis couldn't compete, couldn't even comprehend the scale. Tanks, 50,000 Shermans, plus thousands of other armored vehicles, tank destroyers, self-propelled guns, armored personnel carriers, aircraft. Over 300,000 military aircraft produced between 1941 and 1945, including 18,000 B-24 Liberator heavy bombers, 12,000 B-17 Flying Fortresses, 15,000 P-51 Mustang fighters, 20,000 P-47 Thunderbolt fighters. Ships. Over 2,700 Liberty ships. Cargo vessels built to transport supplies. Peak production. One Liberty ship completed every 24 hours. The record, Robert E. Peary built in 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes from keel laying to launch. Warships, 175 major combat vessels, aircraft carriers, battleships, cruisers, destroyers, plus hundreds of smaller vessels, submarines, landing craft, patrol boats, trucks, 2.5 million military trucks produced, the famous deuce and a half 6x6 cargo truck, essential for logistics, for keeping armies mobile, for supplying advancing forces. The Allies didn't just outproduce Germany. They buried Germany under an avalanche of equipment. Germany's entire tank production, 1939 to 1945. Approximately 25,000 tanks of all types, including light tanks, medium tanks, heavy tanks, tank destroyers. The United States alone produced 50,000 Shermans, double Germany's total tank production, and that doesn't count American production of other armored vehicles, or aircraft, or ships, or trucks. The Soviet Union produced 35,000 T-34s, plus thousands of heavy tanks, KV-1s, IS-2s, plus tens of thousands of other armored vehicles. Britain produced 27,000 tanks of various types. The combined Allied tank production exceeded 100,000 vehicles. Germany and its allies produced perhaps 35,000 total. The disparity in other categories was similar. Allied aircraft production was at least 5 times German production. Allied ship production was incomparable. Germany's surface fleet was negligible after 1943. How was this possible? Several factors converged. First, geography. The United States was immune to strategic bombing. No German bomber could reach American factories. Production facilities operated without interruption, could expand without fear of destruction, could plan years ahead. Germany was under constant bombardment from 1942 onward. British bombers by night, American bombers by day. Factories were destroyed, rebuilt, destroyed again. Workers were killed. Rail lines were cratered. Supply chains were disrupted. Second, resources. The United States had everything needed for industrial production: oil, iron, copper, aluminum, rubber. Synthetic after Japanese conquest of Southeast Asia cut off natural rubber supplies. Coal, Food, timber. Germany had to import most strategic materials. Oil from Romania could be bombed. Swedish iron ore shipments could be interdicted. Chromium from Turkey could be cut off. Every resource was vulnerable to Allied action. Third, industrial capacity. The United States had the world's largest economy in 1939, largest steel production, largest automobile industry. When that industrial base converted to war production, the output was staggering. Ford's Willow Run plant produced one B-24 Liberator bomber every 63 minutes at peak efficiency. The plant was 1 mile long, employed 42,000 workers, produced 8,685 bombers between 1942 and 1945. That was one factory, making one type of aircraft. The United States had dozens of aircraft factories, hundreds of other war production facilities. Germany's industrial base was smaller, more vulnerable, less efficient at mass production. German engineering philosophy emphasized quality over quantity, precision over speed. This produced excellent weapons, but not enough of them. Fourth, labor. American factories employed workers who were paid, fed, housed, and motivated. Productivity was high. Quality was good. Strikes were rare during wartime. Workers understood they were supporting men in combat. German factories increasingly relied on forced labor. Prisoners of war, slave laborers from concentration camps, workers from occupied territories pressed into service. These workers had no incentive to produce quality goods. Sabotage was common. Productivity was low. The combined effect created a material imbalance so severe that German tactical superiority couldn't overcome it. Yes, the Panther was better than the Sherman, individually. In a one-on-one engagement at range, the Panther would win almost every time. The gun was better. The armor was better. The optics were better. German crews were often better trained. But wars aren't decided by one-on-one engagements. They're decided by sustained combat across hundreds of miles of front, by logistics, by the ability to replace losses, by the capacity to maintain offensive operations despite casualties. The Americans could lose 5 Shermans for every Panther and still advance, could accept casualty ratios that would bankrupt European armies and still maintain offensive pressure, could wear down German defenses through sheer weight of numbers, and they did. The Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 illustrated this perfectly. Germany launched its last major offensive in the West, committed its strategic reserve, over 400,000 men, nearly 1,400 tanks and assault guns, including many Panthers and Tiger IIs. Hitler had ordered the offensive personally. The plan: break through weak American positions in the Ardennes, drive to Antwerp, cut Allied supply lines, force the Western Allies to negotiate a separate peace. Then, Germany could concentrate all forces against the Soviets. The plan was desperate, based on hope rather than realistic assessment. But German commanders had no choice. Hitler had ordered it. The offensive would happen. December 16th, 1944, 5:30 a.m. The attack began. German artillery bombardment opened along an 85-mile front. Then infantry advanced, then armor. The weather was overcast. Fog limited visibility. Allied aircraft were grounded. German forces achieved complete surprise. Hans's regiment wasn't part of the initial assault. They were held in reserve, would be committed after the breakthrough. His company now had 28 Panthers operational, better than August. Reinforcements had arrived. new crews, fresh from training in Germany. But Hans noticed something about the new crews. They were young, very young, 17, 18. Some looked 15, and their training was inadequate, 6 weeks instead of 6 months. They knew the basics, could drive, could shoot, but lacked experience, lacked the instincts that kept crews alive. The offensive made good progress initially. American forces were thin in the Ardennes. Many units were green, newly arrived, or were veteran units sent there to recover from earlier battles. They weren't expecting a major attack. German forces pushed 80 kilometers into American lines in the first week, captured thousands of American soldiers, seized fuel dumps. The offensive looked successful. Then, American reserves arrived. Hans's company was committed on December 22nd. Advanced toward the town of Bastogne. The 101st Airborne Division was surrounded there. German forces were trying to take the town, break the resistance, continue the advance. Hans's first engagement was against a mixed force of American tanks and tank destroyers, maybe 20 vehicles, mix of Shermans and M18 Hellcats. The Hellcat was dangerous, fast, 76mm gun that could penetrate Panther side armor, but thin armor, only 12mm. The Panthers destroyed 3 Hellcats quickly, but the Hellcats were elusive, disappeared into the woods, appeared elsewhere. Hit-and-run tactics. The Shermans were easier to destroy, though Panthers killed 6 in the first hour, but more Shermans kept appearing, and American artillery was devastating. The 101st had excellent artillery support despite being surrounded. December 23rd. The weather cleared. Allied aircraft appeared, hundreds of them. P-47 Thunderbolts, P-38 Lightnings, P-51 Mustangs. They attacked German columns constantly. Rockets, bombs, machine gun fire. Hans's Panther survived by hiding in forests during daylight, moving only at night. The German advance slowed, then stopped. December 26th. The weather remained clear. Allied air attacks intensified. American reinforcements arrived in huge numbers. Patton's Third Army attacked from the south, relieved Bastogne. The German offensive stalled. Hans's company had destroyed 34 American tanks and tank destroyers in 10 days, lost 11 Panthers, 8 to aircraft, 2 to tank destroyers, 1 to a catastrophic mechanical failure. But the American forces kept growing. By early January, the Americans had concentrated over 600,000 men in the Ardennes, over 2,000 tanks, thousands of artillery pieces, complete air superiority. The German forces were pushed back, slowly, stubbornly, fighting for every kilometer, but inevitably retreating. Hans saw the pattern clearly now. Every German tactical success was followed by American reinforcements. Every German attack was met by larger American counterattacks. Every Sherman destroyed was replaced by 3 more. The final statistics from the Battle of the Bulge proved his assessment correct. German losses, approximately 100,000 casualties, 800 tanks and assault guns destroyed or abandoned, 1,000 aircraft lost. Most of Germany's strategic reserve, irreplaceable. American losses, approximately 90,000 casualties, 700 tanks destroyed, 350 aircraft lost, painful losses, heavy, the worst American losses in a single battle during the war, but replaceable. Within weeks, American tank strength in Europe exceeded pre-Bulge levels. Replacement tanks arrived from the United States. Replacement crews from training schools. The American military in Europe was stronger in February 1945 than in December 1944. Germany's losses were final. The strategic reserve was gone. No replacement tanks were available. The new Panthers being produced went to replace losses on the Eastern Front, where the Soviet offensive was destroying German divisions monthly. Hans's regiment was withdrawn from the Ardennes in mid-January, sent east. To Germany itself. The Soviets were approaching. The final defense was beginning. By February 1945, Hans's company had 14 Panthers operational, down from 28 in December. The other 14 had been destroyed or broken down beyond repair. Replacement tanks. 0. Ammunition was scarce. Each Panther had maybe 40 rounds of main gun ammunition. A full combat load was 82 rounds, but there wasn't enough ammunition in Germany to fully load every tank. Fuel was even scarcer. Synthetic fuel production had been destroyed by Allied bombing. Romanian oil fields had been captured by the Soviets. Each Panther had perhaps 100 kilometers worth of fuel. After that, the tank would be abandoned. Food was rationed. Men were underfed. Many had lost 20 pounds. They were still fighting, still disciplined, but weakening physically. The end was obvious. Germany had run out of everything: men, equipment, fuel, ammunition, food, hope. March 1945. Hans's regiment defended positions on the Oder River, east of Berlin, facing Soviet forces. The Red Army had over 2 million men massed for the final offensive, over 6,000 tanks, mostly T-34s, plus heavy tanks, IS-2S, ISU-152 assault guns. The Germans had maybe 200,000 men defending this sector, perhaps 500 tanks total, including Hans's 14 Panthers. The mathematics were even worse than in France. The Soviets could lose 10 tanks for every German tank and still have overwhelming numbers remaining. April 16, 1945. The Soviet offensive began. 3 million artillery shells fell on German positions in the coup. First 24 hours. The barrage was unprecedented. Entire units were destroyed without firing a shot. Survivors were shell-shocked, deafened. Many couldn't function. The Soviet tanks came through. Waves of T-34s. The Panthers destroyed dozens. Hans's crew personally destroyed 9 T-34s in 2 days. Didn't matter. More tanks kept coming. Hundreds. Thousands. The Soviets didn't care about losses. Drove over their own destroyed tanks. Advanced through fields littered with burning T-34s. April 20th. Hans's Panther ran out of ammunition, literally empty. No rounds remaining. The crew abandoned the tank, joined infantry units retreating toward Berlin. April 25th. The Soviets encircled Berlin. Hans was inside the pocket, fighting as infantry now. No more tanks, just rifles and Panzerfausts, anti-tank rockets, one-shot weapons. The battle for Berlin was apocalyptic, street fighting, house to house. Soviet forces had absolute numerical superiority, used artillery to destroy entire buildings. Advanced through rubble. May 2nd, 1945. Berlin surrendered. Hans was captured, became a prisoner of war. Soviet captivity initially, then transferred to American custody in September. He was lucky. Soviet POW camps were death camps. Over 35% of German prisoners in Soviet captivity died. Hans survived because he was transferred to American custody early. He was repatriated to Germany in 1946, found his father living in a displaced persons camp. His mother had died in 1944, killed in an air raid on Mannheim. Hans never talked about the war, never joined veteran organizations, never displayed his decorations, worked construction, then factory work, married, had children, died in 1979. His experiences were typical of hundreds of thousands of German soldiers. They'd fought well, often courageously, with superior equipment and training, against overwhelming odds, and lost. Because skill couldn't overcome material advantage on the scale of World War II. The numbers from the final 9 months of the war in Europe tell the story. June 1944 to May 1945. Germany produced approximately 4,000 tanks of all types. The Western Allies produced over 25,000. The Soviets produced over 20,000. Germany lost approximately 15,000 tanks on all fronts during this period, through combat, mechanical failures, lack of fuel, abandonment during retreats. They couldn't be replaced. Production couldn't keep up. By April 1945, the panzer divisions existed on paper only. Most had a handful of operational tanks. Some had none. The Western Allies, by contrast, had over 20,000 tanks in Europe in April 1945. The Soviets had over 25,000. This disparity explains the final collapse better than any tactical analysis. Germany ran out of equipment, out of fuel, out of ammunition, out of trained crews, out of everything required to fight a modern war. The Americans never ran out of anything, had unlimited ammunition, unlimited fuel, unlimited replacement vehicles, could sustain operations indefinitely. This was the fundamental reality of World War II. Industrial capacity determined outcomes. The nation that could produce more tanks, aircraft, ships, ammunition, and fuel would win. Quality mattered, training mattered, tactics mattered, but production capacity mattered more. Germany started a war they couldn't win, against opponents who could outproduce them by factors of 5 to 10. The tactical brilliance of German commanders couldn't overcome this disadvantage. The technical superiority of German weapons couldn't overcome it. The courage of German soldiers couldn't overcome it. The mathematics were absolute. 50,000 Shermans versus 6,000 Panthers. The final outcome was determined by those numbers more than by any battle. Hans survived the war. Barely. His Panther was destroyed in September 1944 during the fighting in Belgium. An American P-47 Thunderbolt fighter bomber hit it with rockets. The Panther burned. Hans and his crew escaped, 3 with burns, 1 with a broken arm. They were reassigned to a new Panther. Then that tank was destroyed by American M10 tank destroyers in October. The crew survived again, transferred to a Panzer IV because no Panthers were available. The Panzer IV was destroyed by British Cromwells in November. Hans was wounded, shrapnel in his leg and shoulder, evacuated to a field hospital in Germany. By the time he recovered in January 1945, his regiment had ceased to exist. Destroyed in the Ardennes during the Battle of the Bulge, he was reassigned to a replacement unit, given a worn-out Panzer IV with a transmission that barely functioned. He fought until April 1945. By then, fuel was so scarce his tank couldn't move. Ammunition was rationed. Food was scarce. The end was obvious. May 7th, 1945. Germany surrendered. Hans became a prisoner of war, American captivity, was held in a camp in Bavaria until September, then released, returned to Mannheim. His city was ruins, 70% of the city destroyed by bombing. His families apartment building was rubble. His mother had died in an air raid in 1944. His father had survived, was living in a displaced persons camp. Hans worked construction for 3 years, helped rebuild what the war had destroyed. Married in 1948, had 2 children, worked as a machine operator in a factory, the same factory his father had worked at before the war. Never talked about the war, never told stories, never joined veterans organizations. He died in 1979 at age 59. Heart attack. Quick. His children found his war decorations in a box in the attic after his death. Iron Cross Second Class. Iron Cross First Class. Tank Destruction Badge. Eastern Front Medal. He'd never mentioned them. His experiences were typical of hundreds of thousands of German soldiers who'd fought on the losing side of an industrial war. They'd been skilled, courageous, often tactically superior to their enemies. But skill and courage couldn't overcome material disadvantage on the scale of World War II. The Sherman tank was controversial. American tankers both praised and criticized it. The arguments continue among historians today. The criticisms: undergunned compared to German heavy tanks, under-armored, prone to catching fire when penetrated, earning the nickname Ronson after the lighter company's slogan, "Lights the first time, every time." Crews knew they were outmatched by Panthers and Tigers, but the Sherman had advantages that pure combat performance didn't capture: reliability. The Ford G AAV8 engine was simple, powerful, and dependable. Shermans could travel 150 miles without breaking down. Panthers averaged 100 miles between mechanical failures. Tigers were worse. Maintainability. Sherman components were standardized. Repairs were simple. A trained crew could replace a transmission in hours. A Panther transmission required specialized tools and days of work. Logistics. Shermans were lighter than German heavy tanks. Could cross bridges that Panthers couldn't. Could be shipped more easily. Could operate in terrain that would bog down heavier vehicles. Quantity. The most important advantage. Shermans were available in huge numbers. Losses could be replaced. Units could be fully equipped. Operations could be sustained. The American military understood the trade-offs. They debated producing a heavy tank comparable to the Tiger. The M26 Pershing was developed, but arrived too late to affect the war significantly. Only 20 Pershings saw combat in Europe before Germany's surrender. Why not produce more? Logistics. The M26 weighed 46 tons. Shipping it across the Atlantic required special transport ships. Moving it in Europe required heavy-duty railroad cars. Many bridges couldn't support its weight. The logistical infrastructure was built around the 30-ton Sherman. Changing to the heavier M26 would have disrupted the entire supply system. The decision was made: accept the Sherman's limitations. Compensate through numbers, air support, artillery support, and infantry coordination. This approach worked. American armored divisions defeated German panzer divisions consistently from Normandy through Germany. Not because American tanks were better, but because American combined arms doctrine was effective, and American production ensured numerical superiority. By spring 1945, Germany had perhaps 2,000 operational tanks remaining. The Western Allies had over 15,000 tanks on the Western Front alone. The Soviets had over 20,000 on the Eastern Front. The material balance had shifted so far that German tactical skill was irrelevant. You can't win battles when outnumbered 10-1. The story of the Sherman versus the Panther illustrates the fundamental nature of World War II. It was an industrial war, a war of production and logistics, a war where the nation that could build the most tanks, aircraft, ships, and trucks would win regardless of individual weapon quality. Germany made a fatal strategic error. They started a war of attrition they couldn't win. Their tactical excellence, their technical sophistication, their individual weapon superiority, none of it mattered when the enemy could produce 5 times as many weapons. Let's examine this in detail through multiple lenses. The production war Sherman production. 49,324 tanks built between 1942 to 1945 across 11 factories. Components standardized. Mass production techniques applied. Peak production, 2,000 tanks per month. Panther production, 5,964 tanks built between 1943 to 1945 across 4 factories. Sophisticated engineering, precision manufacturing. Peak production, 380 tanks per month. The ratio, 8.3 Shermans built for every Panther. Tiger production, 1,347 Tiger is plus 485 Tiger IIs. Total, 1,832 heavy tanks built across the entire war. The ratio, 27 Shermans built for every Tiger. These numbers determined strategic outcomes more than any tactical engagements. Germany could win individual battles, destroy 5 or 10 Shermans for every Panther lost, achieve impressive kill ratios. But the mathematics worked against them. Consider a hypothetical. A German panzer division with 100 Panthers faces an American armored division with 200 Shermans. The Germans achieve a 5-to-1 kill ratio. Destroy 100 Shermans while losing 20 Panthers. Who wins? The Americans. They still have 100 Shermans. The Germans have 80 Panthers, and the Americans can replace their losses within days. The Germans cannot. This scenario played out repeatedly across France, Belgium, and Germany in 1944 to 1945. German forces won tactical victories, achieved excellent kill ratios, lost ground anyway because they couldn't replace losses. The quality versus. Quantity debate. Was the Panther superior to the Sherman? Yes, absolutely. In almost every measurable way. Gun. The Panther's 75mm KWK 42L/70 could penetrate 138 millimeters of armor at 1,000 meters. The Sherman's 75mm M3 could penetrate 60 millimeters at the same range. The Panther's gun was more than twice as effective. Armor. Panther frontal armor was 80 millimeters sloped at 55 degrees. Effective thickness, 140 millimeters. Sherman frontal armor was 51 millimeters at 56 degrees. Effective thickness, 90 millimeters. The Panther was 55% better protected. Optics. German optics was superior. Better resolution, better range finding, more effective in low light. German gunners could acquire targets faster and more accurately. Training. German tank crews received better training. Longer training periods, more live-fire exercises, better understanding of tactics. In a one-on-one engagement at range, the Panther would win 95% of the time. This isn't debatable. The superiority was obvious, but individual superiority doesn't win wars, because war isn't one-on-one. War is system versus system, economy versus economy, nation versus nation. The Sherman had advantages the Panther couldn't match. Reliability. Sherman mechanical reliability was excellent. Mean distance between failures. 150 miles. Panther mechanical reliability was poor. Mean distance between failures, 100 miles. Tigers were worse, 60 miles between breakdowns. This matters in sustained operations. An American armored division could advance 200 miles in a week with minimal breakdowns. A German panzer division advancing the same distance would leave a trail of broken-down tanks. Maintainability. Sherman maintenance was simple. Components were accessible. Repairs were straightforward. A trained crew could replace a transmission in 4 to 6 hours. Panther transmission replacement required 24 hours minimum. Tiger repairs often took days. This matters in combat. A Sherman disabled by battle damage could often be repaired overnight and returned to service. A Panther similarly damaged might be out of action for days. A Tiger might be abandoned. Logistics. Shermans weighed 30 to 33 tons depending on variant. Could use any bridge designed for commercial traffic. Could be transported on standard railroad flat cars. Could be shipped in standard cargo vessels. Panthers weighed 45 tons. Required reinforced bridges. Required heavy-duty railroad cars. Required specialized shipping. Moving Panthers was logistically complex. Tigers weighed 57 to 69 tons, depending on variant. Required specially designed bridges. Often couldn't use existing infrastructure. The logistics were nightmarish. Strategic mobility. American armored divisions could be shipped across the Atlantic, moved across France, sustained in combat, and maintained operational effectiveness. German panzer divisions struggled to move within Germany due to fuel shortages and transportation difficulties. Availability, the decisive advantage. Shermans were available, always. Every American armored division was fully equipped. Replacement tanks arrived constantly. Tank losses were replaced within days or weeks. German panzer divisions were chronically under strength. Replacements arrived slowly. Many divisions had 30 to 40% of their authorized tank strength. Some had less. This availability factor mattered more than any technical specification. An available, adequate tank beats an unavailable superior tank every time. The human cost. The production disparity created human consequences. American tank crews faced German tanks they couldn't match individually. Sherman crews knew they were vulnerable, knew their armor was inadequate, knew their guns couldn't penetrate German heavy tanks frontally. This knowledge created psychological stress, fear, understandable reluctance to engage Panthers or Tigers head-on. Some American tankers called the Sherman a death trap. The nickname Ronson, lights every time, reflected their fear of fire. But American doctrine mitigated these disadvantages. American forces rarely sent tanks against dug-in positions alone. Combined arms coordination was emphasized. Artillery softened defenses. Infantry supported tank advances. Air power attacked enemy armor. Tank destroyers provided anti-armor capability. The result? American tank crew casualty rates were lower than German rates, despite facing superior enemy tanks. American combined arms effectiveness compensated for individual tank inferiority. German crews faced different stresses. They had superior equipment, better training, often achieved impressive tactical results, but they watched their forces shrink steadily, watched comrades die, knowing replacements wouldn't arrive, watched the enemy grow stronger while German forces weakened. The psychological impact of fighting a losing war of attrition was devastating. German morale remained surprisingly high into 1945. Discipline held. Soldiers continued fighting effectively. But the stress was enormous. Hans Becker's experience was typical. He survived 4 years of combat, watched Germany advance to the gates of Moscow and the English Channel, watched the tide turn, watched the slow retreat, watched the inevitable defeat. The experience left scars. Most German veterans didn't talk about the war, didn't celebrate their service, tried to forget. The psychological wounds lasted lifetimes. The strategic lessons. World War II taught lessons about industrial warfare that remain relevant. Production capacity determines outcomes in extended conflicts. Quality matters, tactics matter, training matters. But if one side can produce 5 times as much equipment, they'll win given enough time. Logistics is strategy. The best weapons are useless if they can't be supplied, maintained, and replaced. Simpler, more reliable equipment that can be sustained is more valuable than sophisticated equipment that can't. Combined arms effectiveness matters more than individual weapon superiority. The Sherman was inferior to the Panther individually, but American combined arms doctrine was superior to German doctrine. The Americans won. Industrial mobilization requires time. The United States entered the war in December 1941, but didn't reach peak production until 1943 to 1944. Once mobilized, American production was unstoppable. Germany's early victories occurred before Allied production peaked. Once the Allies mobilized fully, Germany's defeat was inevitable. Strategic bombing of industry is decisive. Allied bombing of German factories, oil refineries, and transportation networks crippled German war production. American factories were immune to bombing. This asymmetry was decisive. The final analysis. Hans Becker destroyed 5 Shermans on August 7th, 1944. Excellent work. His crew performed superbly. The engagement demonstrated German tactical superiority clearly, but the Americans had 5,000 more Shermans where those came from. Actually, 45,000 more, and they kept producing 2,000 per month even in late 1944, when victory was certain. That's why Germany lost. Not because German soldiers lacked courage, not because German equipment was inferior, not because German tactics were wrong. Germany lost because they started an industrial war against opponents who could outproduce them by factors of 5 to 10. Against opponents with unlimited resources. Against opponents whose factories were immune to attack. Against opponents who could sustain losses that would bankrupt Germany and keep fighting. The mathematics were absolute, brutal, unavoidable. 50,000 Shermans versus 6,000 Panthers. The outcome was determined by those numbers more than by any battlefield engagement. Germany's tactical excellence delayed defeat, made the war more costly for the Allies, but couldn't prevent the inevitable outcome. Production capacity determined victory. Everything else was secondary. World War II was won in American factories, in Detroit, in Pittsburgh, in Chicago, in Los Angeles, won by workers building tanks faster than the enemy could destroy them, won by an economy that could sustain war production at levels the Axis couldn't match or even comprehend. German tank crews found 5 Shermans destroyed, then realized Americans had 5,000 more, and that was why Germany lost. The numbers from various fronts tell the story. North Africa, 1942 to 1943. Germany and Italy deployed approximately 2,500 tanks. The Allies deployed over 4,000. Axis forces were pushed out of Africa by May 1943. Sicily and Italy, 1943 to 1945. Germany deployed approximately 3,000 tanks over the campaign. The Allies deployed over 8,000. German forces were slowly pushed up the Italian peninsula. Surrendered May 1945. Eastern Front, 1941 to 1945. Germany deployed approximately 15,000 tanks total over the entire campaign. The Soviet Union deployed over 60,000. Germany advanced initially, then was slowly pushed back. Soviet forces reached Berlin in April 1945. Western Front, 1944 to 1945. Germany deployed approximately 4,000 tanks after D-Day. The Western Allies deployed over 15,000. German forces were pushed from Normandy to the Rhine to Berlin in 11 months. In every theater, Allied numerical superiority overwhelmed German tactical advantages. Individual tank battles might favor the Germans. A Panther crew might destroy 5 Shermans before being destroyed. A Tiger might kill 10. German tank aces racked up incredible scores. Kurt Knispel, 168 kills. Otto Carius, 150 plus. Michael Wittmann, 138. But these tactical victories didn't translate to strategic success, because for every German tank ace, the Allies had hundreds of adequate tank crews and reliable tanks with good logistics support. The mathematics were inexorable. Germany couldn't replace losses. The Allies could. Germany couldn't sustain operations. The Allies could. Germany couldn't match production. The Allies drowned them in equipment. This reality was visible to German soldiers long before the end. Hans Becker saw it in August 1944 outside Mortain. Saw hundreds of American tanks where German forces could field dozens. Saw the replacements arrive while German losses went unreplaced. Every German tanker who survived 1944 to 1945 has similar memories of fighting outnumbered, of tactical victories that accomplished nothing, of watching American and British formations advance regardless of casualties, of realizing that skill and courage weren't enough. The war was decided by industrial capacity. The United States produced 50,000 Shermans. Germany produced 6,000 Panthers. That ratio explained everything that followed. Modern analysis of the Sherman tank has evolved. Early post-war histories, often written by German generals, emphasized German tactical and technical superiority, praised the Panther and Tiger, criticized Allied tanks as inferior. More recent scholarship has challenged this narrative. Historians now emphasize logistics, production, reliability, and strategic context. Questions asked: was the Panther actually better? In pure combat performance, yes. But the Panther broke down constantly, required constant maintenance, consumed enormous amounts of fuel, was difficult to transport, expensive to produce. The Sherman was reliable, simple, easy to maintain, fuel efficient, could be mass-produced. When these factors are included, the Sherman's advantage becomes clear. Would the M26 Pershing have been better? Possibly. But logistics would have been nightmare. The M26 required more fuel, more maintenance, more transport capacity. The infrastructure was built around the Sherman. Switching would have slowed operations. Did American tankers suffer unnecessary casualties? Some. But analyzing specific battles shows American combined arms tactics minimized tank losses. artillery preparation, air support, infantry coordination, infantry anti-tank weapons. Americans rarely sent tanks against dug-in positions alone. The casualty rates support this. American tank crew casualties were lower than German tank crew casualties, despite facing superior enemy tanks, because American doctrine emphasized combined arms rather than tank versus tank combat. The fundamental lesson: wars are systems competitions. Individual weapon systems matter less than overall effectiveness of the military machine. Logistics, production, training, doctrine, coordination. Germany had excellent tanks, but they couldn't produce enough. Couldn't supply them adequately. Couldn't replace losses. Couldn't maintain operations over time. The United States had adequate tanks, but they could produce them in huge numbers, could supply them excellently, could replace losses immediately, could sustain operations indefinitely. Which approach was better? History provides the answer. Germany surrendered May 1945. The United States was producing 2,000 Shermans per month. Still, even though victory was certain, because American industry could. The legacy of the Sherman tank is complex. American veterans had mixed feelings. They knew their tanks were inferior to German heavy tanks, knew they were vulnerable. Many carried those memories for life, but they also knew they'd won. The Sherman had done its job, had supported the infantry, had provided mobile firepower, had allowed rapid exploitation of breakthroughs, had helped defeat Germany in 11 months from D-Day to VE Day. The Sherman served with distinction in every theater: North Africa, Sicily, Italy, France, Germany, the Pacific. It fought Japanese tanks that were far inferior to German armor and dominated completely. After World War II, the Sherman continued service. Korea, Arab-Israeli wars, various South American conflicts. Some remained operational into the 1970s. Total production: 49,324 Sherman tanks, plus thousands of variants, tank destroyers, self-propelled howitzers, recovery vehicles, engineering vehicles. The Sherman became the symbol of American industrial might. Not the best tank in World War II, but the most produced, the most widely distributed, the tank that won through availability rather than superiority. The statistics are staggering. 11 factories produced Sherman's production, peaked at 2,000 per month. 25,000 were built in 1943 alone. Components were interchangeable between all variants. Over 60,000 Sherman chassis were produced, counting all variants. Compare this to the Panther. 4 factories produced. Panther's production peaked at 380 per month. Total production, 6,000 over 2 years. Components were complex and required skilled assembly. Constant modifications meant parts were not fully interchangeable. Or the Tiger, 2 factories produced Tigers. Henschel for Tiger 1, Henschel/Porsche for Tiger 2. Production peaked at about 100 per month. Total Tiger 1 production, 1,347. Total Tiger 2 production, 485. Each tank required approximately 300,000 man-hours to build. The Americans built 28 Shermans for every Panther, built 37 Shermans for every Tiger, built over 100 Shermans for every Tiger II. These ratios explain the outcome of the war more clearly than any tactical analysis. Hans Becker's experience represents thousands of German soldiers who faced this material disparity. They were skilled, well-trained, often technically superior, fighting in better equipment, and they lost. Not because they lacked courage, not because they lacked skill, not because their equipment was inferior. They lost because industrial capacity determines modern wars, because the side that can produce more tanks, aircraft, ships, trucks, ammunition, food, and fuel will eventually overwhelm the side that can't. Germany's tactical excellence delayed defeat, made the war more costly for the Allies, but couldn't prevent the inevitable outcome. The moment Germany went to war with the Soviet Union and the United States, Germany had lost. The Soviets had more people, more resources, more territory. The United States had more industrial capacity, more resources, complete immunity from strategic bombing. The combination was unbeatable. Every Sherman destroyed was replaced by 5 more. Every loss was a statistic. Every crew was replaceable. The American industrial machine kept running, kept producing, kept shipping equipment to Europe. By August 1944, when Hans Becker saw hundreds of Shermans approaching his position outside Mortain, the war had been over for months. Germany just hadn't surrendered yet. The 5 Shermans his crew destroyed that day meant nothing. 5 more arrived by evening, 50 more by the next day, 500 more by the following week, because America had 5,000 more where those came from. Actually, 45,000 more, and that was why Germany lost.